All right, Chair Mike Phan,
Here.
Vice Chair Jonathan Rocha,
Here.
Nicole Kennedy,
Here.
Randy Goodman,
Here.
Arnold Urias is expected to be here, I believe.
Maybe he'll show up.
And then we have Mr. Tony Teeters.
Here.
Right, all present, sir.
All right, thanks. 3A, John, that's you.
All right, I'm gonna let Amber.
Oh,
Yeah,
let's get you a
you
microphone.
need the mic. Thank you. So I think I'm gonna follow along with this PowerPoint presentation. Just to kind of get everybody caught up, we're gonna talk about communicating your message today. And had a nice meeting with Mike and then also a couple of meetings with the team just to look ahead and say, as we go forward with whatever this committee decides to move forward with, what's the plan for communication? And more importantly, what are the key messages on this communication? So I know you've done a lot of work and gotten to a point, but one of the things that we know with workforce housing and other communities is sometimes there's a little pushback, a little community resistance. So what we attempted to do with the communication plan is begin to give you some talking points and some tools to things that you already know, but kind of putting them in a way that will help you kind of remember them. And, you're all ambassadors for this committee. And we know in town, it's a small town, we bump into people. People ask, hey, what's going on with that committee? What's happening? What are you guys doing? Why are you doing this? So giving you some tools to help answer some of those questions. So I'm just looking at the screen up here. So, I did some research and came up with some key points. Of course, your mission and vision statement, which is, I think, still a work in progress, right? That's going to be an important part of the foundation. But also, starting to address some of the concerns, why workforce housing makes sense for Prescott. So, doing the research, looking at communities around the country, web-based research mostly, some of the key terms that start to come out with a good workforce housing program are, what does it do for the community? It stabilizes the community, creates better quality of life for residents, allows essential service workers to live in the communities where they live and work. And that's an important point. I know that you're talking a lot about nurses, about police officers and firefighters. So I think everyone can agree that if they live in the community that they serve, it's a better synergy for them instead of having to commute 30, 40 miles or whatever it is. So it just kind of strengthens and enhances the community. And this has been shown to be the case in other communities. Really, there's studies out there that show that workforce housing, a well-implemented program, indeed does not diminish home values. Again, some of these other things that it does to strengthen the community to make it stronger. Positively impacts local education systems. So here we talk about teachers and educators. Again, we know that that's an issue for them as well. So how does it positively impact the local education system? It's the same concept. Teachers that live in the community where they work, educators, it just strengthens their relationship with that community. Mitigates traffic concerns. If we're not commuting from 20 miles away, there's just, and we're commuting from 1 or 2 miles away or 5 miles, it lessens the traffic on the roads, the inbound roads. So that's an important consideration as well. I know that the city generally is talking about traffic right now and looking at traffic mitigation and measuring that. So if people are living closer to where they work, less cars on less road. Promotes economic development. So part of my role is economic development, and definitely what I hear from right now from people looking to come here is, what's your workforce like? And starting to hear concerns about, can people afford to work there? And it's not just for line workers, it's not just for people that are assemblers or at the lower tiers. I'm even hearing concerns from people who are trying to hire engineers and people that are getting up there in salaries. So it's really something that doesn't just affect folks at the $18 to $23 an hour, but it's really starting to impact and make decisions for people at the higher levels of income as well. So the more that we can have availability of housing, quality of life. It helps us attract business to the community. Fostering a diverse community. So with more housing options allows for more diversity. It does allow for people that maybe are, doing hospitality work instead of administrative work or something, people that maybe are at a lower income level to be able to, again, be part of the community. So we have a variety of different people, different income levels that are working, living, and contributing to the community. And it definitely supports small business. First of all, small business is it's very prevalent here in this area, more so maybe than some in other areas. We have a great, the chamber has over 1,000 members. The vast majority of those are small business owners. Small businesses are just that. They're small. They don't necessarily have the high salary options. But again, the store owners, the people that work for them, having the ability to live and work and contribute to the community in that way is valuable. So these are all key points that I think you should all start thinking about when you're asked and some of the answers to some of the questions. So, how are we going to put a plan together? So here's what I suggest. Right now, you are all in the process of developing a plan. So I feel like I suggest that we're in phase 1. So what we've developed is an FAQ sheet that talks about just the points that we just talked about. This is a sheet for all of you. This will be your talking points. And a fact sheet, which emphasizes those, but the fact sheet's also going to include your mission and vision statement. It'll be a document that you have and that can be shared with the community, more importantly. And then creation of a communication plan. So that's what we're working on right now. Once you have programming, once you have a way forward, some important messaging to communicate to the community about what this committee is doing, then we start phase 2. Following council review and approval of plans, then we start to roll out regular communications. My wheelhouse for communicating for the city is social media. It's Facebook and Instagram, our biggest two. We have 18,000 followers on the city Facebook page right now. So it's definitely a robust medium. General media releases, the Courier, Prescott Times, all of the local media outlets, Signals AZ, they all cover our press releases very well. So press releases, public service announcements, radio is very big here. And so the city has a program for regular public service announcements. They're 30-second spots. So we would use those more for maybe announcing if you're having an open house or if you're going to do a community-wide survey. Or maybe even we can get to developing some did you know facts about workforce housing. So those radio PSAs can really help with that. So that's kind of the regular communication pattern that we have for, regular city communications. Any questions about what I just said? I just said a lot. Yes, sir.
The second one, to create better quality of life. A little more specific. I know what
Sure.
my thoughts are on that, but
Sure.
I'd like to hear yours.
Yeah, so, we do have a fact sheet which delves into it. But again, a lot of what I saw in the research is that residents, we all want to live in the community that we work in, the contribution of that. So if you're living here and you're working in a job, if you're in town, you may have the opportunity to participate in a city committee or, act as a, resident or work at a nonprofit or give back more to the community that you live in. If you're coming from 20 to 30 miles away, if you've got any spare time, that's going to go over there. So I think the quality of life is a very broad base, but again, living in the community that you work in allows you as an individual to have more engagement. And I think that's what I saw a lot in the research. And the fact sheet will give you a little bit more detail on that. But I mean, I think the themes that I heard in the research were it's a more cohesive community. Instead of having a bunch of people coming in from somewhere else, they work, they do their 8 hours, and they leave. If they're living here and working here, contributing, volunteering, part of the school system, it creates that connectivity and really reinforces the community. So that was a lot of what I saw in the research. So hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Okay. So the fact sheet I mentioned is going to be the more comprehensive document for you. It's going to introduce, what is workforce housing. It'll kind of give a definition. And I worked with Chelsea and Amber a little bit on that. I know you guys have talked about percentages of income, right? ULI, Urban Land Institute, has a percentage. So the fact sheet's going to dive into that a little bit so that it helps explain really what, when you hear workforce housing, if you're not on this committee, if you're not part of the city, you really wonder what that means. So we provided a pretty robust definition for that. And a reason for establishing the workforce house availability and accessibility in Prescott. Why are we doing this? Why are we here? And then a little bit about the committee itself. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to ask the team, do you want me to recite or review what we have so far, or it's kind of a work in progress at this point, right?
So I'd like to call your attention to page 8 in your packet, in the agenda packet. And that's where the fact sheet begins, and it covers 8, 9, and 10.
So I just printed out the agenda and then the.
Oh, I apologize. So the documents are separate. It's a color heading, I guess, on the on your stations, but it starts with fact sheet. And John did a fabulous job of putting the narrative together, and it takes information that he just went over and puts it into a narrative form that's easily digestible by the public, and that's easy for us to just have in a quick snapshot or take with us to speaking engagements in the future. But I would love for us to dive into a little bit about it. The introduction part really talks about setting up the story and the narrative of workforce housing. And then the second part, what is workforce housing, folds in the definition that we'll be discussing on the next agenda item. And then on the next page, the reasons, it elaborates on each of those items that John already covered for us. And then the final page of the fact sheet encompasses the mission, the vision, and then really sets the table for all of the short-term and long-term goals. Now, I recognize that we're going to be talking in the next agenda item about the specific verbiage for the mission, vision, and definition. And that, obviously, if they change or become updated, we'll update the fact sheet. But the team and I really felt that this was a good capture, a first really good way to communicate in a small format what this committee's purpose is, what workforce housing is, and how it can help. And I think it goes back to what Nicole had mentioned several weeks ago about just getting the community aware of what workforce housing is and how it affects them, how it affects their lives. So we worked with John and are submitting this to you as in hopes that this would be something that the committee would recommend to council as an approved path forward. You'll notice with capturing the mission, vision, and definition, it also has the goals, which we'll define, but really this is the package that we could take to council as a recommended approval item. So I think we'll kind of hang out here and go around the room for questions, comments, issues, concerns.
You know me, I always have one.
Love it, Randy.
Well, I haven't read it all yet, but I assume that this is for the general public to read. So is there anything in here that says what affordable or Section 8 housing is, and that this is not it? Not to be negative, but
Right.
make them understand.
So it doesn't go into the negative of the picture. It just goes into what we are specifically talking about when we address workforce housing. If you look at the first page, the second paragraph, we say the term workforce implies, and we list the specific jobs and industries that we're targeting. And then in the second to the last paragraph, the short one, it says generally based on HUD and ULI definitions plus local statistics and own research, we define workforce housing as about 80% of the area's median income. Now, there was a range between HUD and between ULI. It was between 60 and 120%, which was a rather broad range. But targeting the 80%, I believe we did the math and it was around $65,000 a year. And that was really close to, the area median income is around 76 right now for family. So 80% of that number, we got the 61 to 65,000. So targeting that group, that's really the workforce right now that encompasses these broad categories of the teachers, the nurses, the police, the firefighters. So we hone in, Randy, into the positive of the picture, like this is what we mean by this, but we don't go into the negative, and I don't know from a PR perspective if we need to cover that.
Can I make a comment about that actually, real quick,
Sure.
John, if you don't
Of
mind?
course.
So, and part of this is me getting educated by my marketing manager at my business, but I do think it's important to people relate more with a pain point when it's negative, right? You can say, these are all the wonderful things that we want for the community, and this is the goal of this committee and what we're trying to achieve. But until you say things like, what are the stakes here? Like, so tell me what happens if we don't care about workforce housing? That seems to get people's attention, really everybody's attention as a human being, a lot faster. So I would say, can we paint in you, and first of all, thank you so much for working on this. This is fantastic. I would just say if we could, I'm a big believer in the negative stakes. So what are the negative stakes? Well, a reduction in services at the city level. What does that mean? Your trash pickup days go to one a week. You know what I mean? Just painting that picture, I think, is huge. So I would comment that, because it's funny. Randy brought that up. I thought the same thing. I said, this is all great, but you're still going to have folks go, but is this a Section 8, or are these multifamily apartments that look like this, or you know what I mean? So I guess my comment would be, yeah, if we could paint the stakes, then that, you know, at a negative light, I think we would get much farther, I think, with the messaging.
Sure. Yeah. So I hear exactly what you're saying. So, you know, really what you're addressing is what's in it for me, right? Like, what will the reader of this document, what's the good and what's the potential bad if it doesn't happen? We certainly can emphasize some of those things, or at least include them in some of the documentation. I think it's better to lead from the positive, but you can also sprinkle in some, well, what happens if we don't do this, and maybe a few answers. So I think that there can be some work. This is, I told the team, this is, I see this as a living document. This is a first draft, and it can continue as we go, as we get feedback from the public and other questions. Can we address them in future versions? Absolutely. So we can definitely look at how to incorporate that.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Go ahead.
A couple comments. I love it. I think it's a great start, and thank you for doing this for us. One thought is that I do agree. I think we need a mix. I agree with leading with the positive, but I'd also love to see really personalizing this, because people react to stories, and if we can illustrate some real true people, if they're willing to be brave, maybe we change their names or whatever, but we can say, hey, this is Emily, she's a single mom and she's a nurse at the hospital, and here's what, you know, here's her story, or here's David and he's a firefighter and here's what's going on in his family. I think people relate to people and their personal stories, so I think that would be nice to get to that phase eventually.
Yeah, and I agree. Telling the story whenever you can is a very powerful message. So definitely something we could look at how to do that.
Well, I agree with Nicole. This is pretty awesome what I've read already. But what I was referring to is earlier, and you guys I'm sure have experienced this. When I talk to a friend or somebody I meet, and I tell them I'm on this committee, the first word out of his mouth is, oh, low-income housing? Affordable housing? And then I have to say, no, there's actually 3 separate definitions for that, and explain it. And I'm just wondering if there's some value to explain that that's not what this is.
Yeah, agreed. And really, It's all about emphasizing key points. The message that I feel is very powerful in all of this is that this is for essential workers. We use that word in here a few times. This is for nurses, firefighters, police officers, and in some cases, even higher level, workers for companies. So emphasizing, going to that sort of hitting that emotional chord. I think in this community, it's talking about public service. It's talking about first responders. And we can definitely, you can tweak that in the way that you put that forward. But, no, this is not low-income housing. This is for our police officers
Right.
and our firefighters and our nurses so that they can live in the community that they serve, which will make this community stronger.
I do have one question / comment about the term essential. That was a great buzzword during COVID. And for me personally, where I was working at, I was considered an essential worker. I got a lot of feedback from families who almost felt like that was offensive in a way, because they're like, well, I work at a grocery store, but I work, at a retail, store. What makes you more important than me? So I think everybody truly is valuable to make a community thrive and run, and that's why there are so many different jobs. So personally, I would love to see maybe reconsidering using that word.
Fair enough.
Good. I second.
One question on the fourth paragraph. This is something that's different or new, but it kind of makes sense, but I want to make sure I understand it. So generally based on HUD and ULI definitions, we define workforce housing as 80% of the area's median income. So that talks about workforce housing at 80% of the median income. Is that workforce? It's
I'll let
defined,
Chelsea and Amber, because
then
we kind of talked about this quite a bit. I know
because
they
everything
did a
we've
lot of
talked about in the
research.
past has been, here's the average median income, and workforce housing is 30%, is defined as the cost of 30% of their, so I need
Yeah,
some
there's a lot
explanation.
of percentages being thrown around. So the 30% is what HUD defines as affordable, 30% of your gross plus utilities. So we go a step further to define the number of that so that we can drill down and figure out where rents need to be. So using HUD's income limits documentation system for the Prescott Valley area, they define the median family income as $76,700. So we just took, we are going to use 80% of that figure as our target. This is the gross salary range that we're looking at. Now, what we didn't say was 80% and give it a figure and then say what we consider affordable is 30% of the gross. So we could add that. We just didn't want it to get too confusing with the different percentages because they're based off of different data points.
Got it. I think number one, it says we define workforce housing as about 80% of the area's median income. So number one, the word housing needs to be dropped. Is that correct? Because the housing goes into what I would suggest is we add to this and we put a date on it that says for Prescott currently, and then maybe the date. So because this is going to be a living document.
Right.
That means a monthly housing cost of X plus utilities or something to that effect. Then it's understandable.
Yeah.
Good. Good feedback.
What's
Thank you.
80% mean to a layman that's reading this? I agree
Right.
with Mike.
Right. Well, and and to your point, the HUD definition of the amount for the median family income will change every year based
Right.
on
In fact, it just did. It was 68.
okay.
I think about a year and a half ago.
Gotcha.
I remember reading that too in some literature from the Block Grant Committee, but it has gone up
Yeah.
because we just came through, kind of a boon time. Now that's
Right.
going to go back down again.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that feedback.
Chelsea, based on what Mike just said, I wonder if further explanation of the recommended, and this man here would know this, when you're applying for a loan, they're looking for the amount of money that goes out of your income every month towards, what you can afford for a loan. I think 30% is the figure. It probably would be even helpful to say that that's the recommended standard, that no more than 30% of your income should be paid on housing. I mean, I don't know. That is a standard in the mortgage business anyway.
Right, and that's consistent with the HUD definition is 30% of your gross plus utilities.
Right. Just for further clarification.
Yeah. So this is a great document, and as a matter of fact, it's defining workforce housing. It nails it very well with a couple of tweaks that we just talked about. And then maybe in the second paragraph, the term workforce implies teachers, nurses, police officers, but can also include public works staff. And essential is we need people that when their water line breaks, that person is critical. When a sewer is overflowing. So construction personnel, service industry, maybe expand it a little bit to make sure that people understand there's a lot of essential services out there, and we want these people to live in our community. We don't want them to have to drive 45 minutes to work. We want them to be part of our community.
You
Great
or me?
feedback. Go first.
She said I can go first. Hey, listen, real quick story, you guys. And so keep this in mind when you write this, if you would. I went and got my hair cut over by Joanne's a long time ago. And the gal that cut my hair, we started talking about this very issue because she couldn't afford, she had to live with her parents. She was 40 years old. And she called herself a peon. And I really resented that. It really bothered me because, yeah, she's not a policeman or a fireman or a nurse, but I don't want to wait 2 hours to get my friggin' hair cut, right? I want to get my hair cut. And so she's just as important in my view to this community, for this community to survive and thrive as those essential workers. So if you could, when you write that, if you could just kind of think about, yeah, please. Go ahead, your turn.
Thanks, Randy. I do have a little bit of a concern about the 80% mark because I think, well, and I guess I want to open this up to the committee to ask your opinion on. It seems to me that we want to close that gap between the affordable housing, which I did look it up finally, and it's those that earn less than 50% of the area median income. So what happens to the 51% to the 79%? Those are still people that are working in our community that can't afford to live in our community. And I would hate to see them just be forgotten in the midst.
Yeah, so according to HUD, you're right. They have limits for very low income, extremely low income, and then low income. So they define the low income as the 80%, and then the very low is the 50%. So I guess that would be a question for the committee is, would you like to put a range on there? We tried to word it so that generally we're looking at products and programs that serve this general percentile, which could go up or down. But I mean, if you want to wordsmith it to be a range, between 50 to 80%, between 50, I think anyone that, we could even expand it to 90%, but that's up to the committee and ultimately up to council to put their 2 cents in as well as to what workforce is defined to them. Any thoughts?
I think again, if we start diverging to extremely low income, I think we start, maybe, I'll throw this up for discussion, we start getting into affordable housing versus workforce housing, and we start graying that water. So
Well,
I would
and-
be cautious about that, I guess.
So isn't affordable at the 50% level? Is that correct, or am I missing something?
Well, I guess that's part of the key here is to stay away from the word affordable and
Right.
just so we make sure we are communicating, we are focused on workforce, working people, working families.
Right.
You know, may I offer too? There's such a stigma attached to the low income because automatically everybody thinks Section 8, low income. And I think because that stigma is there for pretty much everybody across the board that has spoken to me about this, I think when we start to talk about workforce housing, we may right off the bat want to say something. Don't confuse workforce housing with low-income housing. Not the same thing. Because we do have to kind of back that stigma off of what we're doing. These are working people with a good job that want to get ahead. You know, the other thing, I receive, you know, a lot of emails from people. I think we probably need to spend just a little bit of time talking about the counter effect or countering the effect of the NIMBY thing. Because one of the things that's been a reoccurring comment to me was, are they coming into my neighborhood? Where are you going to put them? Don't we have a zoning? You know, and so my answer has always been, we haven't identified that yet. But, you know, one of the things that I have said to a few people is I'm hoping that when these, you know, neighborhoods go up or the complexes go up, that there are CC&Rs. I think the biggest concern is, you know, putting in an instant slum and you know, making sure that people understand, you know, we're going to take steps, and I hope whoever does get involved with this. I mean, most planned area developments, and this probably will be that, have CC&Rs and an HOA, and they're enforced. And so until we actually define that and can figure that out, I mean, I'm not including the one-offs, you know, infill lots, that's a different story. But if we have a developer that wants to come in and start to do some workforce housing, my assumption is they will have an HOA with CC&Rs. So I think the worry for a lot of people, if they bring this, you know, stigma into their neighborhood, is it's going to draw down their value. So in some way, we have to counteract that just right off the bat.
Right, and I think zoning is a good conversation to have with them. I mean, it would have to fit. Our land development code provides a lot of oversight when it comes to planned area development. And then when the city acts as a participating partner in any kind of project, I mean, we'll have some level of oversight when it comes to aesthetics or density. So I think there's a lot more control than just letting them, you know, letting a developer put in whatever they want. The city wants to partner, but you know, there's a give and take with those kinds of relationships. So absolutely, I think that's a good thing to bring out, and especially in light of the approach that we want to take. You know, when there is a viable project, getting in the community right off the bat, letting them have input. Hey, we have this idea, and then bringing back conceptual drawings, bringing back, you know, information for their feedback. It's going to be pivotal to help them understand, because I think with this initial information, folks are going to recognize that if we don't have this type of housing, it's going to affect my life. It's going to affect the services that are rendered to me and my family. I think everybody can get on board with the need for it. And as long as it's rolled out the right way and the communication flows both ways, I think we'll get there. But having that in place, especially before we have a viable project, is going to be very important. Thank you for bringing that up. So back to Nicole's question real quick, just about the percentage and, you know, workforce and kind of where we're pigeonholing things. When Ryan Jones came and spoke to the committee about his statistics, you know, we've pulled a lot of data together from a lot of different stakeholders, and the average income, not based on any percentage, not federal anything, but just looking at the organizations in our community, they were ranging between the 50K mark and the low 60 mark. So I feel like that 80% of the area median income, and then obviously defining what we mean when we say 80% versus 30% of your gross, I think that'll answer that question. As you know, we're looking at this workforce, and we know that our workforce, they earn roughly this, and that's what we're going to. But I don't know if that kind of
I guess it makes me feel like there's still a gap. And do we care about that gap? Does this committee want to bridge that gap between people who are already receiving subsidized housing from, Section 8 kind of properties to those who can afford? Do we want to be that broad? Do we want to be those that are serving the people in the middle? Or do we want to be more specific, like you're saying, with an average? Because I also think back to what Sandy Griffiths had mentioned at the last meeting, and I believe she said the average construction worker earned $41,000 per year, which is more in the 55% mark roughly, right? So we'd be missing out on the people who build our homes. They can't afford to live here. I don't know. It's just a question to put out.
Yeah, it's a hard one to answer. So I sympathize with you because I've wrestled with the same, kind of stuff of trying to figure out who's left behind, who's not. I just think that from the 50, like from what Chelsea said, the 50 to 80, there's a lot of resources that can, now, is it working well? Is the federal government figured it out? Is all that stuff is up for, debate, because there's a lot more resources federally and at the state level and nonprofits that I think do really good work between that 50 to 80. I just don't think that's our purpose for this committee. Now, it's hard to say that because I don't like leaving people behind either. But for me, it's like if we want any fighting chance to combat this community's negative stigma with what type of housing we're going to do, if we're trying to look at really what is the salaries that we're working with, I think that gives us a lot more focus as a committee to move forward with something that's actually attainable, because I work in the nonprofit housing side too, and it's just very difficult. Like, it is excruciating to try to make any construction costs work, any subsidizing to work. Go to CDBG and hope you can get some money from there, and you're scraping stuff along the way. And so I guess for me, it doesn't deflate me because I know there's really good people out there doing that work. I just think we don't want to get into maybe that spectrum just because of all the stuff we're discussing here. It's going to broaden it too much. Now we have this blanket. Can developers or builders even build at that? They're going to say no. You know what I mean? So I guess that's my comment, is it's a hard one to feel like you're leaving folks behind. But I also know, in being in that sector, that there's just good stuff happening there. It's just not as efficient or as effective as we would like to see it go. So that's my comment. And I guess before I hand it off, I think there should be some sort of index we follow. If this is a living document, like we've brought up HUD statistics right now on income, or I think that's what you brought up just now, right, Chelsea? So I don't know if as a committee we just need to stick to, do we want HUD? Do we want to go off of what HUD determines as area median income? Or because this is workforce housing, do we want to base the definition or the percentages off of labor statistics, right? And then now we just marry this thing, ebbs and flows with what the Bureau of Labor Statistics says is the average or the median salaries, right, for jobs in Prescott. That's just something to consider here as a committee, of maybe indexing that so as it lives on, we have some sort of benchmark for the percentages. And I'm in favor of, I guess depending on what the source is and what the index is, then I think we can get into the nitty-gritty of what the percentage should be.
And I'll just I think I want to agree with what John had said, Nicole. I agree with you 100%. We want to be careful who we leave behind, but we're going to leave some people behind no matter where we draw that line. So I think our target, I don't want to say audience, but the target of what we want to help is police, fire, nursing, teachers. Those professions is what's needed the most. And I think that's really why we're here, is to focus on that demographic. So I think John's right. I think if we start widening, I mean, back to the shotgun we've talked about in the past. If our shotgun blast gets too wide, we're just never going to hit anything.
Would there be any value to like a mortgage range that they're looking at having to spend to be in workforce, or is that too dangerous?
No, I think that's a target that is something that we have no control over. All we can say is, here's what we're going to try to do to help people get into a house at this range. Now, whether that is helping them with down payments and subsidizing, or recommending subsidies, or working with somebody that can provide a housing unit at that value. But the bottom we've talked about, it can be addressed from both directions. The bottom line is we need to get to a housing cost, whether it's through helping them or with their ability to pay, or helping them with the cost itself, somewhere around $1,100 or $1,200 a month. I mean, I think we
Well, that's what I'm saying.
beat
Is
this to
there
death.
any value to actually putting that in this document, like a mortgage range that we're striving for? It doesn't mean
Right.
we're going to hit it.
Right.
You know, you put 11 to 1,800.
Right.
I don't know, whatever you put.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is there any value to that? Because I don't mean to go on, and I always do. When I read this at first, it's like to the wealthier person that lives in our town, so they're not paranoid that workforce is going to be a downer. But I also think about the workforce person that reads this, that doesn't understand what 80% of HUD means. But if you said, hey, the mortgage is going to be potentially this to this, they might go, oh, you know what? I might be able to afford that.
Right.
So think about that from that perspective, I guess.
Okay.
I think that's a great point. Everything you guys have said, you're talking a lot about kind of your policy, and of course we can put in there whatever we need to. But to your point, I kind of see that messaging sort of, maybe it's phase 2.5 or 3, when we're saying we have a program, here's who qualifies, here's who should be looking at this. I think that's your next phase of, really drilling down and selling it to people that might not think they qualify otherwise.
Right.
The other thing I'll say is, this is all words. I'm a word guy, but we have some great graphics people as well. So some of these things, once we have, if it's a chart or if it's a graph or something, we can pretty this up with some, once we know what we want to say on the numbers, especially because they can be confusing, we can put graphs, charts, or pictures behind it, and we can work on that as well. So I have another appointment. Just want to make sure, any other questions for me at this point?
Thank you so much. This is a great document.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. So the expectation would be that we take your feedback from this meeting, we revisit this document with John and his team, and then when we bring it back to you on the first meeting in December, we'd like a thumbs up or a thumbs down with putting this on a council agenda in January. Hopefully the first meeting in January with, hey, council, here's our mission, here's our vision, here's our definition, here's our communication outreach plan. And then they can say, yep, you're on the right track. No, we want you to focus in this area. But as a reminder, this committee is to research and provide recommendations to council. So they will see this and say, yep, nope, change it or what. But that's how I'd like to see this rolling out. So,
Can
Randy.
we get a copy before
Yeah.
our next meeting so we have time to read it?
Absolutely. We'll get that out to you as soon as possible. Yeah, we'll try to get it out even ahead of the agenda release.
Cool.
Any other feedback on this document, on the first couple of pages? I know we're going to dive into the mission and the vision here in the next agenda item. Okay,
I think we're good.
fabulous. Well, Mr. Chair, I'm going to move on, if that's all right with you, sir.
Yes, please do.
All right, fabulous. So Amber and I, with feedback from the last meeting, and if you stay in that same fact sheet document that we were just going over with John, and turn to the last page, and the page break is wonky, but if you look at the last page, the very top line is the mission statement. So this was a proposed mission statement. We took Nicole's input, Randy's input. He had circulated a note, and we had discussed it at a prior meeting. And we're submitting to the committee this kind of final draft version of the mission, and would love your input on that one before we move on to the vision. So proposed mission statement: plan and preserve workforce housing opportunities and solutions to promote a healthy, vibrant community for all.
Just my initial thought, what if we just remove opportunities, because we don't really plan opportunities or preserve opportunities, we do that with solutions. The opportunities come first and then the solutions come last, and that's really what we want to, I would say, emphasize, in my opinion.
I like shorter mission statements too. So no, that's fabulous.
You want plan?
No, just take out
Yeah,
opportunities.
just take opportunities out and read through them.
So plan and preserve workforce housing solutions to promote a healthy, and we could throw an and in there, healthy and vibrant community for all.
Yep.
Does that sound good? Okay. With that, let's move on to the vision. So how are we going to do that? We're going to provide housing options to attract and retain quality employees and lead to improved service delivery and quality of life for our residents and workforce. That's rather wordy, but that was our distillation of all the discussion from last time.
It's the one, it says provide housing it says provide housing options, but I think we've talked about, again, addressing it from both directions.
Like the financial opportunities
Right,
as
the
well.
financial opportunities to help them afford. If we,
So you don't feel like housing options captures the down payment assistance program
Right.
that you're,
yeah.
okay.
If I may,
What if it's housing solution?
I believe
Arnold, could you use a microphone, sir? I'm sorry.
it's very strategic to keep the microphones away from me. If we substitute the word options with solutions, then I think we're edifying the mission with the vision, and it's
Yeah.
tying in.
Yep, that does it.
Noted.
You're right.
Thank you.
Yep.
So providing housing solutions to attract and retain quality employees and lead to improved service delivery and quality of life for our residents and workforce. Captures it?
Everybody good?
Sorry about that. The word providing, does anybody have a problem with that? I mean, I'm just worried about, remember how we've talked about we're facilitating rather than providing? I don't know, feedback. What do you think?
I had the word facilitate also written down. I like that word. It puts a lot of onus on us to actually be the ones providing the solution.
Yeah, good point.
I just didn't want to mislead anybody with that word because we're providing information, but we're facilitating
Yeah,
the issue.
right.
That's true, because it makes it seem
Good.
like the body is actually putting together everything to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. Facilitate housing solutions to attract and retain. Da, 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 da. Yeah.
I like it.
Wonderful. Okay. Well,
We got something done.
yeah, we did. And you can even make a motion if you'd like to adopt this mission and vision as amended for recommendation to council.
So what about definition? What did we say about definition?
Well, definition was on page 1 of that document. We were using the HUD and ULI definitions, but we were going to expand upon what the area median income is. Maybe look at Bureau of Labor Statistics. Sorry. Planning world. So look at those organizations and expand the definition a little bit. So I don't think we're quite ready for that one.
Perfect. Good.
Okay.
So do we want to official vote on that?
I think
On
cap-
the two.
For the mission and vision?
Yeah, for mission and vision only. Are we
I move
good with that?
I move that we adopt the 1 and 2, the mission and vision.
Okay.
Second?
All right. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Unanimous.
Fabulous. Thank you. All right. And action has been taken. Wonderful. Okay. I think, Mr. Chair, we are ready for the discussion on goals, and we tried to keep it convenient. Same document. We're still on the fact sheet. We do have it up on the screen too, I believe. But it's also in written format in front of you. The last page of the fact sheet, we have the short-term and long-term goals for reference. Again, this is something that we'll provide to council as recommendations for the committee's direction. So these are goals that would be recommended to council to direct staff to pursue. So again, it's not that the committee has to cull up all of these programs and put these things together, but it would be essentially recommending that council direct staff to put these things together for your input. So if we just look at the screen or your packet, the general plan housing element draft, I think that's well on its way. We'll be meeting as a subcommittee, a few of the members and Amber and myself here in the next couple of weeks. So I feel like that's probably a good solid short-term goal. Then the incentive packet. This was creating an incentive packet for both developers and builders as well as workforce end users. Just letting them know what's available, both federally and, statewide, because it's not just Prescott that's going to be helping with the issues that can assist them, but kind of fully encapsulating the resources available to them as well as what the committee and what the city will eventually produce. And then the financial programs and the ADU code revision. I don't want to take the time to read all of those. You have them before you. Any changes, this is very ambitious for 1 to 3 years. I feel like it's attainable because, general plan housing element draft is on its way. But I want your input. Is there anything you'd like to shift from short-term to long-term? Are there items that are on the short-term list that you really want to hone in on?
The stakeholder meeting, it identifies developer, builder, landowner. My thought all along, and I thought what we discussed was employer stakeholder, not, I think developer, builder, landowner eventually will be part of the solution, but the stakeholder meeting that I was referencing was getting the major employers in town, and the city would be one of them. I think the city should be a leader in this. I think the city should help facilitate this, but the city shouldn't be doing it. The city should. I think the city has a lead and a responsibility, but we're talking. What's the Yavapai Regional Medical Center is 1,300 employees or somewhere there's about, I think. The school district, city should definitely take the lead, but it's not the city. There's a group of stakeholders that is all of it. So I think this needs to be changed to major employer stakeholder meeting.
So I know.
Or committee.
Sorry. I think when we had this discussion, because in the long-term goals, we do have a formalize a third-party stakeholder group. I believe this one stemmed from Council Liaison Cantelmi talking about bringing builders and developers and landowners in to see what they would be interested in having as projects or what they'd be willing to work with on that end. So I believe they were two separate items.
Okay.
But it would be good to put them both on the short-term list. At least have the conversation with the long-term goal of formalizing a third. I think formalizing the third-party stakeholder group is an important one, but that will take time. But let's start the discussion sooner.
And may I also say, real quick, I think you're exactly right, Mike. I think we have to have both of those on there because just by the virtue of facilitating, bringing those together, once these developers, builders, landowners, and stakeholders get involved and they meet and hear the employer's needs, I think that will spark an interest in those who are not involved in this, because I think it's going to take many people over the board, as we talked about. This is not just one fit for everything. We're going to have a multitude of different things, different layers that are going to apply to a lot of different people. So I think just, starting with this right here and bringing everybody in there might be some meetings that are going to, produce some fruit. So I think it's a good idea to have the employers involved as well.
I have a question. On the description for, under the title of landowner, I want to make sure that we can emphasize with clarity so that we don't have like maybe members of the public that are landowners or property owners thinking maybe this is a meeting to voice concerns, opinions, and then the meeting is not as productive because under this heading right here, this is really for those stakeholders that have an interest in promoting this. And I think that we want to emphasize that so that we don't get the wrong audience. There will be a separate meeting for those that have concerns, and we'll have the opportunity to address those concerns and more prepared for it. But I just think maybe some clear definition on that would be good.
Yeah, you just got me thinking. It's my feeling it doesn't belong in goals. It is a function of achieving the goal, but it's having a stakeholder meeting is not the goal. Establishing a employer stakeholder committee, establishing that committee to get things done similar to this committee, those people have a very vested interest. We're an advisory committee to the council, so we can affect we can advise the council. What they do is it's going to be up to them at that point. Mm-hmm. But establishing a stakeholder committee of the major employers, that can get things done. That's where the boots hit the road, is my feeling.
I think the intent behind the landowner and that goal, that short-term goal, was to get the people who would do the work together in a room to talk to the committee about what can be done, what the options might be. And that landowner, I completely agree with you how that could be misunderstood by the public. That would be folks that own large pieces of land that may be able to partner with the city rather than, individual landowners. So it definitely needs some work, but it's up to the committee whether this is on the list or not on the list, and whether we want to talk to the folks and get input as to, because there are developers that specialize in workforce housing projects. So do we want to talk to them early on, or just start talking to the stakeholders first and then let that come later?
I have a comment, Mike. I really struggle with number 5A. I'm 3 of those things listed on line 5, but A, where I do a development, I just did a PAC meeting last week on a project, and I got a pretty good list of hurdles I have to jump over. And they're time-consuming and tough. It's what we go through, right? But that's the deal. We're talking about adding another big hurdle right here, in my opinion, that I have to take part of a development that doesn't work for workforce at all and try to integrate it into that development. Would I mind putting money in a workforce housing fee or something, or a fund? No. But to say integrate workforce housing into my development that doesn't, I'm doing something high-end, it doesn't work at all, and I really struggle with that. I haven't said much when it's got bounced around here before, but I would hate to see that be a requirement of development.
And I've been biting my tongue, so I'm going to probably regret this, but as long as we have certain members of the council that's going to demonize the landowners and demonize the developers, we're never going to, we're going to get what we ask for, and that is this constant battle and this constant, they're the enemy, and we're going to get the very least at the end of the day that, as a city, that we're going to get, instead of working with the developer and saying, let's work at something together. So there's one councilwoman that constantly spreads hate and discontent when it comes to that community. And it's just wrong for the city. It's just plain wrong. We should be working with them and working for the goals of the city instead of setting up this we versus them attitude. And again, negotiating to the very least we can get at the end of the day instead of working together on getting the most we can get.
I'd like to see 5A struck. Sorry, guys, I'm not in support of that at all. Once again, if I go do a high-end development, how am I supposed to work in a workforce element to it?
I will, as someone that's been there many years, but someone that's been there, I would disagree as a general rule. I think there are opportunities there to work with the developer and do that in certain cases. But again, like we've talked here, if you're going to put that in there, then you have to have the other side, and that is a set of requirements and somebody following up to enforce. I mean, again, if you require a developer to build it, you want it to be in perpetuity. So you have to have a housing authority or something, some system set up
Right, and
with
I think
rules and regulations.
those are all great points and valid thoughts. I think we're getting a little bit into the weeds of what this item is, and that was, and it can be more basic. We don't have to set the policy or recommend this language even, but recommending to council that a policy be looked at that looks at new developments, new projects coming in and says, is there a policy or conversation that needs to be had with these developers, builders, et cetera, around workforce and how they can participate?
Yeah, help them create, help them design, but don't require them to do it on that particular development.
Sure.
Meaning donate to the fund of it, help create it, whatever you want to say.
Right.
But not specifically, if I go do a development, I've got to incorporate a workforce element into it. And that's what I read here.
Gotcha.
And I would really resent that as a developer. And it's just another hurdle I don't want to jump over. And so I go to Prescott Valley and do it.
Gotcha.
Can I, we have one of our city attorneys here, and I think you're right. I think we would have a very hard time doing that. But now, here's the catch. If you decide to become a workforce housing development and you are now taking taxpayer dollars, that's where I think we can then make that a requirement. What you're talking about is something completely different. And Mike's probably one of the biggest philanthropists up here. If you're a philanthropist and you own that property and you have your property rights, you can decide to do that on your own. Nobody's going to stop you from doing that. But when you make it a requirement for somebody that is not collecting taxpayer dollars in some form, which is what we were talking about, how it becomes affordable, okay? That's a different thing. There's always a string attached to that stuff, and anybody that's built anything for the government understands that. You receive money from the government, from the taxpayers, there's going to be a string involved. You make an agreement to that, though, when you collect those dollars. But if you're a private entity, a private builder, I don't see any way that we can require you to fall under that. And Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think maybe what the concept was early on was incentivizing workforce housing. So it's voluntary. If I want to come in and build, is there something I can get back from the city if I put in a certain amount of units of workforce housing? But actually requiring it, you're going to run into all sorts of private property rights arguments. But a development agreement is an agreement between a private property owner and the city. And there has to be something in it for both sides. Not every development in the city, probably most of the development in the city, doesn't have a development agreement. You just have whatever your development rights are pursuant to the existing code and laws. So it's I don't know if you want to kind of go with the incentivized approach versus pulling it out entirely, or not?
You could clarify that. If you're opposed to taking that line out, maybe you could clarify that through some different verbiage that brings in the word incentivized. Because again, I don't, if he misunderstood that, there's going to be other people
Yeah.
that are going to misunderstand that. And, you know, we got to remember the building community, it's not everybody functions at this level. There's a lot of people that are functioning at a much lower level that are barely scraping by. And with all, you know, I've said this a million times, construction is probably one of the most heavily regulated industries in this country other than a nuclear power plant. So, and it costs, there's a cost to doing that. So, you know, again, if you're getting taxpayer dollars, you can do whatever you want, but there's going to be a string attached to that. If it's your private property and you decide to give up a unit, that's your choice.
Chelsea, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Let me piggyback. This may be a question for legal, but so what gives the city the teeth that it needs, whether, and I don't know, I guess, whether it's policies, a document, I don't know, what gives the city the ability to negotiate with a developer within a development agreement to say, this is now in our general plan, there's a workforce housing committee, the council has adopted XYZ objectives. So now as a city, we look to you as a developer and go, okay, you need some concessions or you want to negotiate some things, let's get a DA together. And now how can the city negotiate that for the benefit of workforce housing objectives, I guess?
Right. So
What
the
would they
city,
need?
yeah, the city has certain things it can give a developer, like water, that they may not have access to.
Yeah.
And that's always our biggest kind of cudgel. And to the extent that the city wants to negotiate with a private developer, let's say they have a large tract of land, and the city now has this important policy goal of incentivizing workforce housing. If you as developer commit to making a certain percentage of your development workforce housing, the city can provide you things like water, assistance with improving infrastructure, and those sorts of things, potentially waiving certain fees, not development impact fees, but maybe some certain administrative fees and things like that. So it really is a negotiated agreement. And I think
From policy, though.
what Mr. Goodman was concerned with was we can't have a law, a law of general applicability saying anyone who develops in Prescott has to commit to workforce housing. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. So policy, essentially.
It is
right? So
right,
it needs to
policy.
go back to a policy within the city code.
Right, and I think it's the incentive policy. Like, the city can offer you these certain things if you commit to building a percentage of workforce housing.
Okay.
Or you can even have projects that are all workforce housing,
Okay.
and we can give you maybe more.
But it's voluntary.
So
But it's voluntary.
Okay, so follow up from either you or Chelsea. How do we go about the policy change? I mean, meaning like, how does that come to fruition?
So
What are
I
the steps
think
to do that?
a good short-term goal would be taking, you know, to Randy's point, maybe striking the language there and having a simple goal on the list that states create a workforce housing policy that includes incentives for developers and certain other criteria. And then feeding, getting council's buy-in and then staff creating and looking at options, looking at other successful programs in other jurisdictions. We start with a draft policy for council recommendation, a draft policy that's more explicit and not confusing to both the developer and also gives the committee what it thinks it needs as far as workforce coverage and potential. Did that answer your question? Okay.
And what we're doing is we're combining 2 and 5 into one.
And the way it's done is simple. It's you bring a resolution to the council, and the council adopts as its policy, whatever the incentive policy is, and abides by it.
But Chelsea, that falls into something that we've talked about many times in the past, is defining what that is. Because every time you make a definition of what that means to qualify for a workforce housing development, I think we need to clearly state what we're giving them. You know, it's, we're going to give you this, but you're going to give us this back. And I think that has to be clearly defined, what the city can do and what they cannot do.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. It has to be explicit. And, you know, I'm not sure if it's conflating the 2 and 5, because in my mind, an incentive package is more of, you know, all your options that are available and more of an advertising mechanism, whereas a policy would be like, if you're ready to contract, if you're ready to come into the city, then we want you to consider these things. So I think they could be conflated, but they could be separate items as well. But yeah, they would have to be explicit in definition of what workforce housing is. And, you know, these projects might not be workforce oriented. They might be a new project that comes in and recognizes they are bringing maybe manufacturing and they need housing for their folks. Well, maybe the policy has a fee in lieu. You know, they're not going to put housing by their manufacturing plant, but they would like to contribute to get something from the city, yes, but also to contribute to the cause of workforce housing. So that could be worked into the policy. But to Connie's point, it would need to address both the workforce housing project specifically, but also those developments or projects that are not workforce oriented, but have the option to participate. Okay? So striking A, 5A,
Thank you.
and are we didn't answer the question as to removing 5 as to meeting with the developer builder kind of landowner. I know we're going to rework that. Do you feel it's premature? Do we want to put that in a parking lot?
I don't think it's a goal. Personally, I don't think it's a goal. I think it's how we achieve the goal, but it doesn't belong in goals,
Okay.
my thought.
Other thoughts?
Can I add on to Mike's point? I would suggest perhaps we reorganize this in general to be broader goals with what the objectives are underneath it. Because, like, for example, we could say we want to create an educational strategy to build consensus in community as a goal. And then, you know, part of that is the community outreach plan that we're going to approve, financial options, et cetera, as objectives.
Great input. Thank you. All right, ready to,
One last thing here. So are these short-term goals and long-term goals? Originally, when we created this format, it was because we were trying to figure out, what do we do as a committee? What is our existence like? Are we a working committee? Are we sticking around for 5 years and coming up with programs? Are we not? So I guess I simplified it in my head. Our short-term goal is we recommend things to the council, right? That's our short. I mean, really, as a committee, we're gathering data, coming up with what ideas we think might work, and then we just hand them off.
That's
right?
correct.
Okay, so these short-term and long-term goals are essentially just that for workforce housing, and this is how we pitch it to the council. Essentially, is to go, there's a short-term component, long-term component, and if that's the case, I highly recommend, or I'll just propose this to the committee, that we need for sure, as part of that goal, to hire a full-time staff member for the city, because I keep coming back and back around on all these wonderful things that will have no enforceability strength, no administrative management strength, because it's a lot. I mean, it's just a lot of work. Like, I know we're not going to be here as a working committee to achieve all of those things on behalf of the city. I think we've all kind of come up with that already throughout the meetings. So I would just say, I mean, simply, I would add that item onto the short term, is that I think within 1 to 3 years, if we're very serious about this problem, then we should very much be looking at the city, looking at within their budget, looking at what resources are available to say we need someone to be able to implement and execute these goals, these objectives. Because if not, quite honestly, it feels like we'll spin our wheels, we'll gather the data, the information, we'll have all the consensus in the world, and everyone can relate with the problem, and let's do it. But who's doing it? Who's going to actually be left behind to do it?
Well, and those are good comments. And just to clarify, yes, the committee was formed to research and provide recommendations. That doesn't mean that you're not a working committee. It just means you're providing well-rounded out recommendations. So that might look like, hey, council, give us direction on these short-term goals. And if you agree with them, we are asking you to direct staff to do this. Okay, that could achieve, for instance, the incentive packet. Council, we're recommending that you direct staff to create an incentive packet. Staff will then come back to the committee with a draft incentive packet, and then you can take that to council and say, hey, we like this, we're ready to go launch it. But to your point, and I think it's more on the long-term goal list, is that third-party stakeholder group was really the mechanism that, or the staff, the addition of city staff. I know that with budget restrictions and things, it will likely not go forward. I can't say, I'm not on council, but it's, I won't say a long shot, but it may be a long shot. But perhaps meeting you in the middle is moving that, formalizing a third-party stakeholder group to do the actions. This committee recommends policies and things to contribute to the solution, and then the formation of that third-party stakeholder group is the action component, and we participate in that.
Ma'am. So go ahead.
Oh, you go ahead.
I was going to say, I was struggling with the same thing. So I'm sitting here thinking about, is it a goal? Because you guys have heard me already, I absolutely think a full-time staff position is required that even answers and works as a liaison with a stakeholder group. But the city is a huge employer, and this is a serious issue. So whether it's in our goals or it's just one of the recommendations similar to public outreach that we make to council, hopefully in January, before policy setting has been done and working on budget and everything else, we do need to get before council. But I think it's absolutely a recommendation. We recommend you hire somebody full-time. Now, they know what the priorities are. They know what other pressures are there. So it's at that point, it's their decision. But I think we recommend.
To be honest, Mike, it just doesn't work that way. Now, if this thing, takes on a life of its own and it gets so big that we feel like we need to have a full-time administrator, once it's proven itself that this needs to be administrated, but remember the process. Once you all set up this policy, everything is going to be contained in ComDev, because this is development, okay? It doesn't come under any other department in the city that I can think of. So it's going to go right back to our planners. It's going to then start to follow the same process that any other development would follow, with attached guidelines. And the guidelines are up to you all. So Chelsea right now is running that department. I don't know what the permit status is right now, how long it's taking to get a permit for all of these big developments. This one would fall under a little bit different guidelines, because obviously we're expanding the guidelines if the developer chooses to come into the ComDev department and put in a planned area development based in workforce housing. They would have to be well versed on what what those benefits or the incentives are going to be. So I don't think it's proven itself enough for the city to put everything else aside and, push this up to the front. We do have big fish to fry, but I think when you observe how the city works, every single person has to be justified in why we're paying them. We're still in baby steps for this thing, but like I said, in a few years, if this thing takes off and we've all of a sudden got 5, 6, big workforce housing development people that want to come in here, and it's going to take an individual administrator, because that's what it's going to be. I mean, she's not going out there swinging a hammer. We're administrating the project based on these recommendations or initiatives that we're going to put forward to them. So I think it's highly unlikely, and I'm only speaking for myself, that to walk in right now and have the city, hire a $65,000 a year administrator for workforce housing, I don't see it happening right now. But again, let's see what happens if this thing starts to build up traction. then maybe we've got something we can go to council and say, look, we need help. They're going to have to do that. We need help.
Yeah. Respectfully, hang on just a minute because I want to address that. What we're talking about is not just through development services, though. What we're talking about is someone that can work with Northern Arizona Housing Solutions on helping that fireman that wants to move here and wants to buy a house for him and his family, that needs someone to work with on those programs within the city for down payment assistance. And all the city is doing at that point is they're helping with the guarantees, and the city gets paid back that money. So that's one thing we've talked about. The other thing we've talked about is working with grants and other subsidized ways to pursue this. Working with the development community is certainly part of it, but there are so many things that we can be doing, and we don't have anybody here to do it other than somebody's that can only put part-time to it. So again, Connie, I think it's this committee works at the council. If the council tomorrow says we're going to disband the committee, we're all out of jobs.
Well, I have,
that'd be nice.
and I agree with you, Mike.
But the bottom line is we're going to make our recommendations what we think is best for workforce housing. Then the council's going to do what they're going to do at that point.
Well, I have, and Steve will tell you, I've been advocating for a full-time grant writer for the city for a very long time. Because that grant writer can not only serve this purpose, they can serve a lot of purposes. There's a lot of government money out there that we can't even tap into. I'm going to use just recently the airport situation, where you have a person that's well versed in grant writing. She's been able to attract over $50 million to this community, but that's her lane. She knows how to manipulate that. We need somebody that can do that, not only for workforce housing, but we've got a historic town we lived in here. There's all kinds of things that we could tap into if we had that level of knowledge and those connections to be able to do it. So can we get somebody just for workforce housing? I mean, I'm all for you. If I was the queen for a day, I'd say yes, we could do that. But I'm not. I'm a realist, and I just know how this thing works. But again, if it starts to build the traction, then we have real proof. We can go back to the council and say, look, this is how much work this person needs. We need a dedicated person to do that.
All right. Thank you. Randy?
Well, when you guys were talking, the word grant came to my head too. Every town and city in this country is dealing with this. It's not just us. Right. So there are those kinds of funds. So I propose that we put as our goal not to hire that person or require the hiring of that person, but that this committee pursues avenues for funding that position. Whether they hire that position or not, that's up to council. But if we can work on our goals to give them an avenue to go get that money, then it's up to them,
Okay.
right? But we've done our part.
Got it.
That's
Okay.
all.
So maybe Randy, you're saying a short-term goal is to identify funding sources
Right.
for a workforce housing liaison
Like that?
administrator. Okay. I mean, that's fine. It's making our job description bigger.
All right.
I have a very quick question, and I don't know the answer to this. Can this committee solicit funds without the permission of the council? I mean, can I go and talk to a rich guy and say, give me money? And because I don't know. Because I would like, and I would be willing to do this. I've done it for a long time. I think the Chamber of Commerce should be advised of this and say, here's what it's going to do for you. And we would like you to tell your members that if they donate $50 a month to this, it will help something. You have realtors that could donate $100 a commission. You've got builders that could give you a couple $100, not mandatory, but asking them to come up with a couple $100 on every house they sell. And earlier you talked about your program where it goes on and on and on. If this were kept live, the program would never die. And I don't know is that something we can do without permission of the council?
No.
Because we're representing the city.
Right. This is an advisory committee that is to research and provide recommendations to council. So on the short-term goal list, there is set up a fund account for workforce housing. Now, how that fund account is funded is the question that would need to be answered. And I know when Mark Woodfill, the finance director, was here, we did ask the question, hey, could we receive funds from other stakeholders to put into a workforce housing bucket? And he did say that was a viable solution, but
He didn't say, could we ask for it? See, that's where, he said we could receive it, but it wasn't clear whether we could, as part of this committee, approach people in our official capacity and say, we are with the Workforce Housing Committee. Here's what we're trying to achieve, and we'd like your help.
Well, I think that goes back to the stakeholder meeting. You know, I know Dignity and the other stakeholders in the community are willing to, and I can't remember the survey results, but contribute financially as an organization to the resolution or at least some solution to this problem was something that there are people that would like to do that. But I can't answer your question directly. It would require a council blessing and recommendation that they approve. So that could be something that's asked. But again, it would be, it's already on the short-term goal list as, you know, creating that organization stakeholder meeting and then setting up a workforce housing fund and then identify funding sources for workforce housing facilitators. So those are all, they're all kind of in there. And then Connie had a,
I'm sorry, Chelsea. So in theory, if we get these recommendations approved with these goals in mind, right? Council's like, okay, set up fund account for workforce housing. Let's do that. Engage staff, right? Funding sources, we approve that. Good. I don't see the council saying, no, don't look for money. We got money, right? That's not the story we have here. So if that's true, would you think that's enough of a blessing for us to really do that? To go and speak, once we have our definition of workforce housing, once we have a very good polished narrative that we can speak to the public and say, okay, realtors, okay, you know, Chamber of Commerce, this is what we're about, this is what we're trying to do, and then we, for you, yeah, and this is how you can contribute to it. I mean, are you saying that, would that not be enough to be able to do that?
I think you'd need to explicitly ask council, like, if that's a goal that you want to pursue, then let's be a little bit more explicit in how we ask them. I think, you know, putting a goal down that says, you know, have a stakeholder meeting with local organizations and then a separate one set up a fund account for workforce housing, that doesn't really connect the dots. I think it would be important to let council know that our intent behind the stakeholder meeting is to specifically ask for them to contribute to a fund that the city will manage. Yeah. And then they would know explicitly what they were saying yes or no to. And we do also need to expand, I like the objectives portion of what Nicole said, letting council know exactly what that means to this committee.
Can I just offer, you know, so there's I'm sure you've all heard of the Yavapai County Community Foundation. To do what you're proposing, this happens a lot, believe it or not. You should look into the structure of how that works because you have to have a fund manager, okay? They do this on several other things. So if a developer, again, wanted to come in here and wanted to solicit money, it would go into an organization like that. And they would handle the money because you have to structure the Workforce Housing Fund as a 501. Okay, or you need to get it to be legal, and there's an avenue in order to set that all up. But again, the fund manager, if they created that fund, workforce housing for Prescott, Arizona, or whatever it is, and then you start to solicit funds from the community, they have a fabulous reputation. Mike, I know you're familiar with the Yavapai County Community Foundation.
So Arizona Community Foundation
Yeah.
of Yavapai County's
Yes.
board meeting started right now, and I'm a board member, and I'm supposed to be there. So.
Well,
Yes. I don't know if it's the right, I'd have to do a little research because it's not really the goal of the foundation, but it might fit. It might fit.
only because of the 501 status.
But yeah, I think the city of Prescott and others would fit as a 501c3, but it would have to be formalized. They're I don't know. Good thought. I don't know. I'd have to.
We
There's
would like
also-
a commitment today.
Chair. Can I throw out a possible example that might fit into this? So a couple years ago, it was recommended to council to do the Change for the Better grant program. And I don't know if you can speak to this a bit, but we do have donation meters and an online donation form where people can put in to donate funding to a fund for the city that then we issue out grants for homeless. So I don't know if something similar to that could be a recommendation of creating a donation avenue like that. I don't know if Mike or Matt could speak to that.
The city is allowed to and often receives donations from individuals. And the individuals, if they qualify for a tax break, can get a tax break for that. As to your particular question, can I, Tony Teeters, go out and represent myself as a member of the Workforce Housing Committee, and on behalf of the city, would like you, rich guy, to give us $50,000 to put into a segregated account? For that, I'd want top cover from the council. So they don't get the call saying, why is Tony Teeters haranguing me for $50,000? But no, the city can accept money and donations. We do it all the time. To somebody's point, there's probably going to have to be a segregated account, and that's going to be through Mark Woodville and the finance department to figure out how they may want to do that. And to Amber's point, yeah, we can even set up a specific project like the homeless donations.
So it feels like that's pretty much covered under the last item on the short-term goals list, set up a fund account for workforce housing. That could be something that we explore with council. Are we ready to move forward?
I think so. Are we? You got something else?
Just one little thing.
Is it you?
Go ahead.
Okay.
You first.
I have one possible, I know this is a long list, so I don't want to complicate by any stretch, and we don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but something that occurred to me recently, as far as low-hanging fruit goes, I think one of our important roles is to be building consensus with community, especially as we're educating and trying to mitigate the NIMBYism that is out there. And so one thing I had thought of was, could we recommend to council that we maybe a little more aggressively enforce the city code that is about cleaning up rubbish and debris outside of people's homes? I think that might be a goodwill gesture that we're here to promote property values and prosperity for everybody.
We'll get you the number to the code enforcement department.
Okay.
The only thing I was thinking, guys, is under short-term,
You are talking my language. He knows. I'm the squeaky wheel, okay? If I can't get it done, no, I'm kidding.
somebody, I guess from this committee, maybe, I don't know, some volunteer that wants to go out and address the public, the senior centers and things, and explain workforce. Could that be a short-term goal that we can tackle? I mean, there's a lot of
That-
volunteers in this town, right?
Well, that would be what you'd be recommending to council through the community outreach plan that John Heine presented.
So it's,
So
Yeah.
those.
yeah, but who does it?
We would anticipate the committee members to do that. So booking you for certain speaking engagements at local clubs, at local events. I know I've already received a request from a local realtor group that meets 2 times a week in different locations to have someone speak about workforce. But coming up with a good plan and a good base of information that's provided at those meetings so that everybody's speaking the same language and giving the same stats is what the outreach plan does. And our hope is that that council will approve the documents that can start phase 2 of that outreach, actually pushing the message out.
So the requested speaker is going to come from this committee then, right?
Yes, it should.
Correct.
One of us, because we're the most knowledgeable.
Absolutely, because we want the message, sorry. We need the message not only to be ubiquitous, but it has to be uniform. if we don't have that message being broadcast from within this community, then we risk the tonality or the message becoming garbled.
That's not what the other guy said yesterday. You know, if you talk to two board members, we're not on the same page, we're in trouble. That's the premier, we have to be on.
I'm good.
Okay, are we good?
I just wanted to know.
All right.
All right, so we're down to number 6, create a city-ran program similar to the county's Home of My Own. Seems like a fairly good short-term goal and very specific and measurable. Any comments on that one? So the quarterly outreach, creating an education packet, Randy, that goes to what you just spoke to. You know, the education packet is kind of what John has proposed to us, and then doing a quarterly outreach is something that could be started next year. And then the final one, set up a funding account for workforce housing. Sounds like we talked about that one. That's a good solid item to include on the list. Any other questions on or additions to
I mean,
short
would
term?
it be wise just to add what we just discussed, set up the fund, but also solicit or raise the money for it? I think would be, like you said, very specific to council of what exactly we're asking to do.
Okay. Any other additions to the short-term goals list? Any other changes? We've got a ton of notes, so
Yeah, I think quarterly outreach, can I recommend we get rid of quarterly and just say community outreach?
yep.
And create an education packet, and then B, speak to, engage community and groups and clubs and things like that, like Randy's talking about.
And it's going to be pivotal to do this when there's an actual project or initiative going forward. I don't know if we want to take the time to talk about it now, but just the message that would initially be sent out to the community, just, hey, did you know workforce is a thing? And basically taking them through John Heine's steps. We'll just flesh that out as to what it might look like moving forward, but I think we have a good basis. Okay, community rather than quarterly, and then engage, item B. Any other questions, changes to short term? Okay,
Is incentive packet going to include the, maybe discussing water policy? Maybe this was brought up in your presentation. I really dug that idea as far as revisiting the water policy to alleviate and maybe even streamline water rights to a workforce housing qualified project.
yeah, we could put that as an example.
You know, pursuant to what the definition is of all that, right? The percentages that this is the folks we serve, and if they
Right.
meet all that criteria, I would love to see, because I agree, water's a big deal.
Yeah.
So that's almost one of the biggest incentives I think we can, or the city can offer.
And that would be something that we would take back to council once, if they are on board with creating the incentive packet, then we work on what that will include and then take that back to them when it's drafted.
Okay.
But yeah, you're right.
I just didn't know if we present incentive packet and leave it that broad, and the council would be like, yeah, go for it. We
Yeah.
don't know what, but do it. And then we would have free reign, or if they'd be like, well, what are you thinking? Like, you know what I mean?
They
So-
might have questions that dig into the weeds like that. They may have. So having those, you should answer them. It's a good practice to answer questions of council. But the idea of the short-term goals list is, hey, council, are we on the right track here?
Sure.
These are solutions that we feel the city could do right now. We can investigate these things. Are you good with each of these items? Any other comments on the short-term goals? Okay, great. And then the long-term goals in the packet, you know, formalize a third-party stakeholder group.
And let me,
Yeah, go ahead.
I do have a comment on the short-term goals. I think we should move stakeholder group into the short-term goals.
Okay, great.
Oh, that's true.
What do you say?
The long.
9.
Formalizing a third-party stakeholder group, meaning employer group, that needs to happen sooner than later.
Great. Then build a tangible product, create a strategic plan, identify the number of units needed. Okay. Well, I think we have a lot of notes on the goals, and what we'll do is we'll revisit the fact sheet document and use this as our vehicle to rework the definition, rework the goals, and get this back to you next time, and hopefully get you all to recommend moving this forward to council as a recommended document.
What do we mean by build a tangible product? We're not actually developing, right? Ourselves?
Correct. Maybe it should be partner
Or
or
design.
facilitate in the
Design.
building.
Yeah.
Help
Well put.
design something.
Yep. Agreed.
Facilitate.
I have a dumb question before we adjourn.
Oh, no, another dumb, no,
Yeah.
oh, sorry.
Do we have more of these microphones so we don't have to do the ollie shuffle here?
I think they might be on order. I think they were gonna.
Come on, it's a
Gotta save for
microphone.
the employee
So
we need to hire.
we do have an alternate option.
Well, Arnold doesn't even have
Can't
one.
even get high enough chairs back here.
Andy, that's by design. They don't
It's like this.
We can always sit at the dais until I don't know if we're getting more, but we can always sit up there. I know that we kind of picked this for a more intimate discussion, but there are mics at all of those if we ever decide to move up there. Nah.
We like it down here.
So at that point, we share. Sharing is caring.
Something.
Okay, great.
Just one more.
Just one more mic? Oh, okay. All right. Well, I think we've fully discussed item C, 3C on the agenda, Mr. Chair.
Agreed?
And our next agenda item is just future agenda topics. Our next meeting is going to be the first Wednesday in December. And due to the holidays, I wouldn't recommend a study session, an additional study session in December. So then at that meeting, we will be finalizing the documents that you reviewed today for recommendation to council. And we're shooting for presentation to council, their first meeting January 9, but they also have, 2 meetings a month. So there's a meeting on the 23rd as well. And then the presentation to the general plan committee will be at the end of January. So at the December meeting, hoping to have the general plan element perhaps better roughed out for you. And we'll discuss the general plan element and the council recommendations at the December meeting. Any other recommended agenda topics?
I think just one thing, I just discussed it with Connie. I think when it goes before council, that meeting, some of us should be there because if they have questions, they're going to need somebody to answer them.
Well, that's a great point, and I would recommend that one of the members of this committee present the item to council. I'd be happy to do it on your behalf, me or Amber, but I think it would mean more to council and more to the public to have
Yeah, but they
a
probably like
represent.
you more than they would any of us.
I think it would mean a lot to have one of the members of this committee do that. So
Nicole will do it.
Nicole will. Oh wow, Randy.
Remember that commercial? Mikey will do it.
But to your point, Tony and Connie, well stated. You should be all of you should plan if you're available to attend that council meeting. Theoretically.
Oh, God, here comes a lawyer.
No, you can have a joint meeting where we call it an official meeting of the city council and an official meeting of the committee. We've done that with the planning and zoning department and where they've had really
One
broad
topic.
scale kind of policy issues. So that's another option, or you can just make Mike do it.
Yes, the chair.
We can stress the need.
Okay, something to discuss for the next meeting then.
All right.
Great.
Okay. Anybody else? Anything?
Volunteered you.
I think we're adjourned. Thank you.
Okay, now you can go to your other meeting.